Today is Tuesday, January 28th, 2025, and the board meeting work session is now called to order. It is 6:02 p.m. and all board members are present except for Director Carson Cottingham. First Vice Chair Guzman Ortiz, will you read the land acknowledgement?
Thank you. We're gathered today on the land of the Kalapuya, who are represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. The relationship between the Kalapuya people and this land continues unbroken to this day, and we offer gratitude for the land and for the generations present and past who have stewarded the land since time immemorial. We respectfully acknowledge and honor past, present, and future Native American and Indigenous students and staff of Salem-Keizer Public Schools. We invite you to join us in honoring these ancestral grounds and celebrating the resilience and strength of all Native American and Indigenous people.
Will you please stand and join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Superintendent Castaneda, are there any modifications to the agenda?
There are no modifications, but I would love it if you would give me just one moment of welcome before we jump in. So our one moment of welcome actually comes to you, board members, as part of our continued celebration of Board Member Appreciation Month. And I want to tell you a little bit about the white boxes you have in front of you. We have a spectacular art teacher at Waldo Middle School. And over the summer, I had a chance to visit her classroom, and her name is Miss Burry Roller. And when I went into her classroom, it was just packed to the gills with all different forms of art. And she told me a story about how even in the middle of a pretty terrible ice storm in which a tree fell on her house in Portland, the thing that she ran back into her house to get were the art supplies for her classroom. She does these amazing pieces of art with her class, and she very generously extended this gift to you all as part of Board Member Appreciation Month.
Thank you. They are simply beautiful. I will turn this portion of the agenda over to Director McElroy and the team. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair Richardson, board directors, student advisors, and Superintendent Castaneda. Actually, I'm going to pass it back to Superintendent Castaneda to first talk about a little bit what we're going to see in our budget moving forward.
So tonight we are starting a process that many of you are familiar with, which is a review of our integrated plan as it develops and moves through the required approval steps on way to the Department of Education, the Oregon Department of Education. And we are actually teeing up a pretty big topic tonight that harkens all the way back to our board retreat when we talked about the importance of having an aligned multi-year plan that helps ensure that our time, people, money, and energy is all pursuing our board goals, the 5 that you set. So tonight is going to have multiple elements to it. It's going to be a presentation of the results of engagement. It's going to be a presentation of the initial building blocks of our recommended 2-year plan. And it is also going to include a brief pit stop in a look at the future as it relates to money. So if you could just advance to the next slide. I have only 2 slides and none of them are graphs for you tonight. So first, we're going to take a quick look at what the new biennium could look like for Salem-Keizer Public Schools. This is based on the governor's recommended budget as it currently stands. And so what we wanted to show you here was sort of line by line how some of those adjustments were playing out. You can see the item on the left In the middle, you can see its overall value to the state. And then the two right columns are an anticipated Salem-Keizer Public Schools share of that money if our enrollment holds steady at 7% of state enrollment. And so a few things to notice here. First is that this is, I think, actually a historic governor's recommended budget for Oregon with very important and financial and technical adjustments that have changed the amount that she is recommending for public schools. So you can see that over the 2 years of the biennium, if it goes through as is, there will be somewhere in the range of $81 million in additional general fund resources for Salem-Keizer Public Schools. That is really good news, not just for us, but for the whole state. And certainly the governor's office and her team in the Oregon Department of Education deserve our recognition at this point. To be at this point in January, I think is much better than anyone reasonably has seen in the past. However, it also is going to require advocacy. And this goes along with the legislative agenda that you all passed a few months ago. And we have been inviting legislators into our schools for visits. We've been talking with them, and we've been distributing the agenda and working with them to just build up their understanding, not just of the words on the page, but what it looks like in schools. We'll continue doing that through the session. So now you've seen what the possible revenue side looks like. Over and over, last year I said our revenue increases are not keeping up with the pace of expense growth. And even this year, you've heard me say, even with this amount of increase, we're still not keeping pace. So let's look at what that could look like over the course of the biennium. We're going to go row by row here, but first I want to offer a kind of broad disclaimer. There is a lot that we don't know right now. So this is not a projection. This is more like a scenario that illustrates a very important trend. It's based on some broad and reasonable expectations, but amongst the things we don't know is where our licensed contract will land, because we are once again bargaining in just a few months. So first you can see the PERS increase, which has received a lot of media attention. That's 20 million each year of the biennium. So right off the top, of our 81 million in potential new revenue, 40 of it goes straight to PERS. That is not an expense we can control. Then you've got this line of COLA and STEP. And these are just the routine increases that happen for our workforce. And what you see here is that if we made no other investment decisions, you can see the combination of PERS and the COLA and STEP increases is around $100 million in additional expenses. So that's the context that we need to understand related to the 81. The 81 is an enormous step forward. But the fastest growing part of our budget is personnel, and personnel is 90% of our operating expenses. When the segment that grows the fastest is that overwhelmingly the majority of your budget, every single budget cycle now, the only thing that can happen is that we start squeezing up against the ceiling. That's the harder part of this. But the part that I do want to underscore is that the work that you all did last year has set us up for a much, much more successful bargaining and budgeting biennium, because we have the ability to plan now. We are not in a fiscal crisis. Throughout our region, you have already seen Portland. They announced 40 million last week throughout our region for the rest of the spring. You are going to hear school districts announcing reductions, and those reductions will include contemplation of the governor's recommended budget. So they're going to be cutting even if these increases come. In other words, we had our hard year last year. Our job in the upcoming years is to maintain a grip on sustainability, to not lose track of it and end up in a boom and bust cycle. That sets the stage for the planning work that you're going to hear about now. And the one piece of financial context I want to add is that we are building a 2-year plan based on the resources we will actually have. Not on our ambitions, not on our dreams, not on what we wish was true, or what we fantastically hope we could make true. We're building it on what we actually have. And that means that we have to be incredibly thoughtful about the investment of people, time, and money to achieve the goals you guys have set out for us. So with that, I think I will turn it back over to Jonathan.
Thank you. We're going to start with a high-level overview of the planning process, where we are in it, what got us here. We're going to end with a preview into the priorities for each of the strategies that we're developing. So just bear with me as we do some primer and preview and context building to start. First, want to sort of throw back to summer and even earlier when we were looking at the results policy and policy governance and the role of the board in this. We, over the last few months, have been doing results policy monitoring, executive limitation policy monitoring, but to put this conversation back in the high-level construct of what policy governance is, you, the board, set for us the results that you want us as a system to achieve, the outcomes, the annual targets, and ultimately that 5-year outcome target for the most important student outcomes in our system. And you also set those executive limitations by which we cannot break in pursuit of those outcomes. What we do as part of strategy development is to make sure that we are achieving those outcomes within those limitations and the resources available to us in partnership with our community, our staff, our teachers, and our students. That is a lot of what gets us to what you're about to see. So wanted to just start with that framing of the purpose and role of the plan and how we are bringing that to you as a board to make sure that we are aligned to those outcomes that you have set and that we're ultimately achieving those outcomes and targets each year and over the course of multiple years. So a little bit of logistics. We are developing a 2-year plan. This is in line with the standard cycle and cadence of the state. So this document on the right is directly from the ODE. They suggest a 2-year budget planning cycle as part of a larger 4-year planning process. A lot of what we're doing is meeting the state requirements. However, we know that we want to go beyond just meeting the state requirements. The next thing is we do have to sit this within our resources. So that budget picture that Superintendent Castaneda just gave us, that was one of our initial and primary operating constraints. We know we have to make this work. And finally, and foremost for all of you, tied directly to our board goals. So you're going to see in the construction and outline of the initiatives and the strategies that direct alignment to those goals. If that's what we're doing now, if we think forward, the end of this 2-year plan and looking into long run, what we also want to do is develop our organization's capacity to do this better, to understand what's working, to evaluate if the investments we're doing make sense as we think about the long-term outcomes for our system. We want to align strong annual planning cycles next to strategic integrated planning cycles as well. So it's not multiple independent processes, but one cohesive vision. And finally, and this is going to be a theme in a lot of what you're going to hear, building strong systems underneath that. With strong systems and processes in place, this becomes something that we can build on and sustain and get that positive flywheel spinning year after year. So first, we have on the left an image from our 2023 to 2027 strategic plan, right? And what we've done is we've taken a lot of this and made it more concrete. More important than what we're doing, however, and the timelines that we're following and the requirements that we're hitting is why we're doing this. First and foremost, we owe all of the people in our system, our schools, our teachers, our students, our family, and our community members, stability and clarity about where we're headed. We can't second guess what we're prioritizing. We can't change it year over year. We have to give people the runway to make sure that we can hit those goals, because these are long-term systemic goals that we're trying to face. And if we change our minds every year and every month, we're not going to hit those. Second, maximize resources. You heard the budget picture. Budget's part of it, but more valuable than just the dollars themselves are the time and the talent and the passions of every single educator within our buildings and every single student within those halls. That passion, when aligned, is our most valuable resource. And finally, and you're going to hear this again, I said this again, right? Focus on our fundamentals. Those fundamentals are going to be what's carry us forward to a bigger, bolder vision when we have more opportunity and more resources. But if we don't set those fundamentals in place right now and don't build ourselves strong systems, we are setting ourselves up for future failure. So a lot of what you're going to see might not feel super flashy, but that is what's going to get us to long-term success for our students. So a little bit of a primer of where we are now and what we've done over the past few months. First, community engagement. You're going to hear more on this in a deep dive in a second. We've engaged over 2,000 individuals across students, families, staff, and community members, and especially drilling into particular focal groups to make sure that we have their voices in this plan. Next, outcomes focused. You've already set for us the outcomes that we're targeting and building around. 3rd grade reading, 9th grade on track, graduation, regular attendance, and sense of belonging. And finally, we've engaged in a root cause analysis to better understand the key drivers and conditions for success. If we don't understand what are the key drivers in those root causes, we aren't necessarily aligning our resources to the most impactful levers. Before moving on, I want to pause for questions, because then I'm going to pass it over to a little bit of a deep dive from our WESD team around our community engagement so far.
Okay, thanks. May I just ask one little one here? So where are we now, community engagement through the surveys and interviews? It sounded like you said past tense. I was curious what areas you are targeting for that. Where and who are those released? Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. And actually, that will be the deep dive that we're going to hear in a moment. In addition to the required state focal groups that the integrated guidance from the state tells us we should be looking at, we do a lot of additional community engagement. We've weaved in the last year's worth of community engagement as well into a renewed effort from this past fall. Again, the contexts are probably a little bit different, but we didn't want to lose that great amount of prioritization that our community gave us. But we asked slightly different questions in this fall engagement to really focus and align to those student outcomes.
Sorry, so I understand you're going to go into a deeper dive, and I'll listen, but I still, so it sounded like you said there's a resource that we're told as a directive to figure out who and where we need to hone in those questionnaires. So we're
Correct.
going to go over who that is specifically, though, those groups, and why maybe it doesn't go out to everyone again? Okay.
Yes, yep.
Okay.
And Ella will have more information on the particular groups, but they include, for example, we engaged our CTE teachers, we engaged students and families of our homeless students, of different subgroups within different race and ethnicities, as well as different grade levels, as well as our community partners across multiple different sort of external support agencies as well. I think in total, it was about 30 different groups.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Our family happens to fall under one of the minority classifications, and we don't typically see the questionnaires for those that typically fall under that, so that's why I asked. So thank you. I figure if I don't get them, then maybe somebody else doesn't either, so thanks.
Yep. Thank you. And a lot of these were not just questionnaires, but direct interviews or focus groups that were a little bit more intimate in setting, just so we could get deeper feedback from a smaller group as opposed to very cursory feedback from a whole group, but certainly opportunities to improve and engage both wide and deep. All right, any other questions? then I'm going to pass it over and introduce Dr. Ella Taylor, Chief Research Officer at the WESD. They helped us in compiling and aggregating hundreds of pages and notes and interviews and research surveys into the findings you're about to see.
So good evening. Chair Richardson, Vice Chairs Gutzman Ortiz, Harnish, thank you for having me here to talk a bit about the community engagement that Salem-Keizer experienced and went through. My job, I think, tonight is to address sort of the groups that were interviewed and to also bring forward the themes and sub-themes that came out of that. And also to remind you just a little bit about some of the community engagement that you did prior to this year. So the agenda for the presentation is we're going to talk a bit about the community engagement that occurred in fall of 2023 and a little bit earlier in 24, but mostly we're going to spend a fair amount of time on the community engagement that happened just recently. I'll share the process that we at the center and at WSD used and highlight some key themes and sub-themes through that process. So in the next slide, I'm going to highlight sort of the 3 community engagement activities that had really large turnout. The first was, you may recall, in the fall of 2023, there were 6 very large community engagements that happened at high schools where there were presentations and individuals were able to identify particular tables that they wanted to sit at and give feedback. There were about over 850 individuals who attended that from a variety of focal groups, and I think that's really key. And these focus particularly on what is required. It's called the 5 required data elements. And so each of those, the questions were revolved around those 5 elements. And a fair amount of information came out about what was truly important. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. We did give a report at that time, and so any of the highlights were in that. In the spring of 2024, you may recall there was another community engagement. This was an online survey. There were 11 questions, and it really did focus on making those very difficult budget decisions that you had to make. And so that did have over 6,000 individuals respond, and again, really powerful information. And it's important to remember that both of those are community engagement. So that's a lot of feedback that the district has received in order to design what they are wanting to do. And then in this fall, over 2,100 students, families, staff, and community were part of either focus groups. There were some surveys, there were some interviews. And so I think the innovative approach that Salem-Keizer took this time was to be very specific about how these groups, and as said, it's very prescribed by the Oregon Department of Education about who has to be in these groups, and there are over 30 of the groups. But how to do that so that it was respectful of those communities and respectful of those groups. And that process did occur. The district was responsible for outreach to those groups. As we go on to the next slide, please. So identifying where those were, who needed to be a part of those groups, developing the protocols, and that's, again, particularly important because not every group is going to use the same protocol, right? So it's important that it was done in the language of the group. It was important that it was, it honored that particular group, focal group. Survey questions, for the most part, were very similar, but they also modified based, again, on the focal group. And then, in essence, gathering that feedback. So the district was also responsible for gathering the feedback. And I can't tell you how happy I am about that because there was a lot of feedback. And it was all verbal feedback, and so somebody was recording it, and I was really happy it wasn't us, to be honest. But it was a lot of work, and the district should be congratulated on that. Our job at the ESD and at the center was to develop the protocol for reviewing all of that data to make sure that we could organize that into themes that made sense, in particular in relationship to the integrated guidance, and then to make sure that we used the best strategies that we could to categorize all of the data that was there. And the next slide shows you the process steps that we used, particularly in First, there were the focus groups, and there were some surveys. There was particularly a good survey of CTE students that we'll talk about in just a little bit. We took all of that data and we did old school. We put it into a spreadsheet, and we had 2 individuals go through all of the data that was there, and there were thousands of different pieces of data, and begin to categorize those into sub-themes and, well, first themes, focus group themes, and then sub-themes. And then we reviewed that, and we sort of argued about it until we agreed upon, yep, we think that's the right focus group, that's the right sub-theme, and here's how we want to deal with that. So we came to alignment. As we go on to the next slide, where we started the analysis, the groups were, for the most part, specific to students, families, staff, and community. There were a few groups that had both students and families together. We did our best to separate those where we could identify the student voice versus the family voice, so that we were still able to have the 4 groups, the 4 classifications of students, families, staff, and community. So what we did for the analysis in the next slide is we reviewed all of the feedback, we categorized the comments, we got to inter-rater reliability, and we identified the broad focus areas and themes for that. This slide in particular shows a little bit about how we categorize this and the focus areas. So I'll go through this quickly because I do want to make sure that you get an opportunity to see some of the feedback. So there were 3 focus areas as we identified them. The first was sense of belonging, which is obviously a key component for Salem-Keizer. It's one of your key areas of measurement. There was also building trust as a focus area, and then there were eliminating barriers. And the important thing about this is that, to some extent, some of what comes up in sense of belonging or building trust as a positive can also come up as a negative in barriers, right? So they're both ways of looking at the information. Then we went through sub-themes to try to make it more specific, right? So particularly, like if you looked at sense of belonging, acceptance, really critical for all of the groups, basically students and families, particularly around acceptance. And so we just literally put an X about this is where we had evidence of these components within these sub-themes and within the focus areas. And now I'll share a bit about the focus areas as we move on to the next slide. The first one is sense of belonging. There were 4 sub-themes, as you can see: acceptance, opportunities for community involvement, positive focus on cultural awareness, and family engagement. And rather than giving you the entire document to look at, I've highlighted some comments that came through so you get a sense of how each of these show up in each of these sub-themes. So the first being the acceptance. And you can see here from a student, and the student says, get to know me, understand where I am at and how I learn best. Make instruction simple, offer help, and make the environment where I feel comfortable asking for help. So looking for that acceptance and really valuing it. As we move on to the next theme, opportunities for community involvement. As staff member, collaborate with community organizations that have strong ties to diverse communities to ensure that the programs address the specific needs and challenges faced by students from these backgrounds. So you start to get a flavor of what these comments look like as we go on to the next theme of positive focus on cultural awareness. From a family member, finding and connecting with people who can speak my language, who can accept me and my family for who we are. And I just wanted to emphasize this. We got a number of comments related to language and how important it was for families to find other families, others who could speak the same language that they could. Understanding that Salem-Keizer has numbers and numbers of diverse speakers of all types of language, and how important it was for them to find another family who had that same language. And finally, the next theme of family engagement, again from a family member. I feel that we are part of the educational community because they are always looking out for families and students. Definitely what you want to hear. As we move on to the next focus area of building trust, there are 3 sub-themes: welcoming environment, communication, and focus on equity. So with building trust, a welcoming environment, and this is where the CTE student survey really came up. Over 1,200 students responded, and what's so exciting about this is 84% of them indicated they feel valued and respected at school. Absolutely good feedback on that piece of really being valued. And you can see here a comment from a student, attention, talking to the teachers, conversations that allow me to get to know the staff and them to get to know me. Teachers need to teach and interact, not just give paperwork, and again, how important that is to students. As we move on to the next theme of communication, a community member. Conduct consistent listening sessions and short briefing topics. There's a lot of misinformation regarding district practices and training. Outreach in this area would help to shout down critics of processes that are actually going well. Right? So again, a supporter who's like, communicate more, tell more, because so many things are positive that are happening. As we move on to the next theme of focus on equity, ensure from a staff member, ensure the curriculum reflects the diversity of the student body by including culturally relevant materials, examples, and case studies that resonate with students from various backgrounds. Again, that importance of seeing oneself in the curriculum. Finally, the final focus area of barriers, and this is where we had the most sub-themes. Again, there's the positive side of some of this and then the negative side of some of this. And so these are the barriers that individuals talked about coming into, and you can see what they are there. As we move to the first one, the first theme, outdated processes. And this came up a fair number of times from some of the community in particular. Removing barriers allow us to partner with the students and schools, keep contacts up to date, right? So community members saying there's just some things that are making it more difficult for us to be involved. A lack of communication. Now, we just saw where communication was positive. Here's a lack of communication from a family member. Establish clear and accessible lines of communication, such as emails, newsletters, and regular meetings to keep families informed about school events, academic activities, and relevant news. Looking at the next one of staff support, 2 students provided, in essence, we provided 2 student comments here. One particularly important, teachers should take bullying more seriously. And from another student, reassure me that it's going to be okay. Help me if I need help or if I am behind. I need to know that I can do it. Right? So both students looking for that staff support. Another theme that came up, and this is interesting because it did come up both, we've given you a family member comment here, but it also came up with students, and that was childcare. And this family member says, I know that a lot of parents need after-school daycare for their elementary kids. I wish each school would offer that support for free. That would be ideal. Parents need time to learn English and look for jobs. With little kids at home, this is impossible. And then another theme of language and cultural barriers from a family member. We are recent arrivals and don't know a lot about this country, culture, language. School environment is new to our children, and language barrier is the greatest issue. And finally, the last theme within this category of transportation. And here's a family member who was experiencing houselessness. Getting my kids to and from school. We are not always in the same place from day to day, much less week to week. Having the 2-week wait time after changing where they are picked up and dropped off is really tough, because by the time the route gets set, there's no way to be sure my kids can utilize the bus every day because we may not even be in that neighborhood. So you really get a feel for the community through those comments. And again, I would commend Salem-Keizer for taking that much time to really reach out and talk to so many individuals. Lastly, I just want to remind you of that spring 2024 and fall 2023 feedback. Spring 2024, you may remember this was unfortunately right after a shooting incident near a campus. And so safety and campus security, without a surprise, came up as the #1 topic. However, you can also see that elementary, middle, and high school fine art electives were very important to these individuals, and direct to student mental health services. And I won't read these, but you can see that students still need activities programs to help them succeed, and then AVID being an important component for a student. And then from the fall 2020-2023 feedback, 3 highlights, top things that came out: school culture and community being so important, extracurricular activities, and their sense of belonging again. And from a student, sense of belonging is most important. Students need to feel they belong before they can learn. And from a parent, same thing. Sense of belonging makes kids want to go to school, stay on track to graduate, and invest in reading. All comes from a sense of belonging, feel like they have a place. Finally, some simple next steps and recommendations. Clearly, blend all of the community engagement data together. It does paint a picture for Salem-Keizer. It paints a picture of growth. It paints a picture of tremendous outreach to a large student population and family population and community. Infusing that data into the development of the integrated guidance, outcomes, and activities, I know that has occurred. So exactly what is being asked by the Department of Education. And then aligning that feedback with the strategic plan strategies and initiatives. Again, something that you're already in the process of doing and have done. So that gives you a little bit of a deeper dive into the data. The staff in particular should really be commended for that type of outreach. That was a really big lift to reach out to all those groups in such a large district. Thank you. Sati.
Thank you. I really appreciate you helping us. And you have been a great help for us over the years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oregon Child Integrated Data Set, they do kind of take data from 5 or 6 different agencies and they come up with analyzing the data and see how they interact with each other and come up with policy solution. I remember right, they have identified mid-year transition. It's a risk factor. Second thing, children whose family are involved in kind of, are receiving SNAP benefits. And children in foster care. So when you kind of use that, irrespective of all other, the equity indicators which we use, but they all kind of flow through that poverty. Then that's an indicator. And second thing, mid-year transition. So it's almost like you start a new cohort, sense of belonging, graduation, difficulty. Were you able to kind of, during the sampling, either intentionally or were you able to sample those 3 categories? And were you able to, because you took C-Tech, which is a very unique cohort for 2 reasons. One, it's perhaps the only place where we have truly an integrated school model where children from all the zip codes will end up there. Everywhere else, by our policy, we are tied our children to the local schools, so they are kind of, in a way, quasi-segregated. So is there a way to, so it shows in your C-Tech that there's a very high sense of belonging, which is good, which is what we want. But was there a sampling, intentional sampling effort at other schools where they are not members of C-Tech and to compare those 2? And that the first question of sampling, you intentionally sampling those categories, mid-year transition, those who are SNAP beneficiaries, and children from foster care.
So the ODE does require that families and students experiencing poverty, families and students experiencing houselessness, families and students experiencing a variety of other, what we might consider difficult situations, all did have to be surveyed, or at least talked to. So through focus groups primarily is how the district did it. So that information is part of this information. We did not pull that out specifically to say just this group. So we did combine all the groups and kept it combined in that way. Could we? Yes. I'm not sure that the N is large enough to make a statement. And for the CTE survey, we didn't do the survey, so the district did the survey. And from that, I would anticipate that there'd be a way to disaggregate that data, but I haven't looked at the data.
Well, I'm curious to know, because we know when schools are integrated in a sense, different groups come together and study together with the clarity, they do well. Whether it's Arkansas 9 or in the current day when you mix people. But when you kind of keep cohorts separated, then they don't do well, especially with intersectionality with other social challenges. Like if you tie them to their zip code, they typically don't do well. So I was just thinking, could we sample a little bit here and there and to see and compare that with the CTEC and see if there is a difference in qualitative things. I mean, that's what the whole idea of school segregation versus integration, Brown versus.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, Director Ortiz.
Thank you so much for the information, Dr. Taylor. I had two questions. One may be better answered by the district, but I don't know. If I'd love to hear a little bit more around the process for the fall 2024 focal groups and kind of what the planning looked like, what those groups, how those groups were convened. And then secondly, as I was looking at the chart on the focus areas and sub-themes, in the eliminating barriers section, I noticed there's none of these kind of stand out in terms of staff. So I was curious if that kind of had to do maybe with like a sampling size, seeing how staff are on fewer of these themes and sub-themes. So I was just curious if there was an observation or just a little bit more information on. I'm assuming that staff would also feel inclined to share about how else we could eliminate barriers. So I thought that was an interesting point there.
For your second question, which is the one I can answer, I would say, yeah, there's a bit of the sampling about how that was done, which may not have shown up right in those comments. I think that there are ways to get that in other places, but it didn't come through in this particular piece. I have to turn over your first question to the district.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I might ask Rob if there's a particular question, but what we did is we identified, and a lot of these groups are student groups that we serve directly, either through particular teams that focus on that particular focal group, or through existing data that we're able to pull and identify for those students. So for example, our McKinney-Vento program students or our students experiencing houselessness, those were specifically sampled, not just because we have that as the requirement, because we know there's a lot of intersectionality with mobility and intra-year transition. Students that are experiencing that, even though a lot of the program is meant to provide that stability for families, we know that there's transition. Over the course of about 6 months, we directly identified over 30 student groups, and then the team decided what was the right way, either through a survey, a focus group, one-on-one interviews, or community conversations, that we were then able to track and monitor the particular feedback from that group. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but I think Rob's team spent multiple months, countless nights and evenings, meeting with those community groups, compiling those, taking those notes, and handing them over to Dr. Taylor's team.
We have a question from our student advisor.
I was going to ask if by CTE students, did you mean like CTEC students or like what?
That was CTE across the district, so not just CTEC students, but any student in a CTE program in their school.
CTE program like cooking, business, any? Okay.
Correct, yep.
I guess that brings up a question for me. So we saw that the students that were in career technical education had like that higher connection. Did we see any sort of correlation with other students that maybe just had like other extracurricular activities? Or is that something that maybe we sampled? Maybe even just like a future question, just wondering like if that would also impact.
Yep, absolutely. I don't think we have particular data on that, but it's certainly data that we can bring. And I would also note that our sense of belonging data through Panorama, we ask every single student in the system a lot of these questions. And I think as we remember Chris Moore presenting that a few months back, such rich information there that we can also dig into as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
And I would be remiss, since Rob is sitting right here, Rob Schoper, our Director of State and Federal Grants and many other things, led this community engagement effort. It was his team in collaboration with our communication and engagement team that spent countless hours really deeply investing their time and energy to listen, hear, understand, and capture those feedback. So thank you, Rob.
Chair, can I ask just a follow-up?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. McElroy, I just wanted to follow up and see, so we have such a large sampling, which is more than 20% of our student body roughly. It's a very good power you get from this. In future, when you are going to be sampling, will you be using the same cohort or, based on your intervention and then see what changes, or how are we going to, or are we going to have a fresh set of people sampled again?
Yeah, I think just given the nature, a lot of these focal groups, they're not necessarily always like the exact same individuals in this. However, a lot of this is not just for the sake of this one-time integrated planning. It's also deeply informing the way that we should think about implementation planning and monitoring, to your point of following up of did we do this? The integrated plan guidance requires us to follow up these groups every 2 years, but it's much more than just the 2-year checkpoint. It's the way that we're engaging and taking that qualitative data next to the quantitative data in all the work we do.
So same group will be more or less sampled again, is that what you're saying?
Yes, yep. Can't guarantee it's the same individuals in those groups, but the same groups that we would engage each of these cycles.
Thank you very much. This time I'm going to turn it back over to our superintendent.
We're going to now shift over to the preview into the emerging 2-year plan. And as we do that, I want to just go back in time about 18 months or so, maybe about 14 months, to when this board adopted the results policy. Really, pretty much any time I get a chance to say, this clarity is what moves systems, I say it. It's not that our system didn't know or care about these things before you adopted this results policy, but this is what allows us to start aligning everyone around it. To say that sense of belonging or that graduation rate or 3rd grade reading is our district goal. I think at this point it is very safe to say that there is not a school leader or a district leader anywhere in Salem-Keizer that doesn't know these 5 measures. We talk about them regularly. We review progress against them. We talk about progress at a student level, at a school level, and at an aggregate level. And then we report on them publicly here. Just last weekend, I was with Chair Richardson when we were talking about literacy in a community forum. And there was a question about how serious the district is. How serious are you really about reading? And one of many ways to answer that question is, it's 1 of 5 and everyone knows it. So I just really want to thank you for that clarity, and also say that that now is the umbrella that aligns a whole bunch of things that you're about to look at. So we've got the results policy. Underneath it, we're going to have the 2-year district plan, and inside that, the integrated plan. That's how we slowly move away from multiple plans with multiple commitments that make it hard for us to know how to saturate resources in the areas that matter most. And I think with that, I will hand it back to Jonathan.
Yes, thank you. So this slide is just a reminder of those goals, those outcomes, our annual targets, and where we have the data and we're officially allowed to report on that in a public forum, the data that we have for this prior year. So most of these we've already made it through in terms of reporting. We have a couple more to go. Next month is going to be our regular attender report, and we're going to wrap up with our graduation report. That graduation data is embargoed from the state until Thursday morning. So you will see exactly that as with the rest of the state as well. One thing to call out here, though, is you see 2 of those. It's really 5 metrics, but sense of belonging is divided into grades 3 through 5 and grades 6 through 12. They're not combinable, but for 2 of the 5 that we have data for, we're not on track and below our annual target. And for 3 of those, we have hit our annual target. And as you can note, you help set rigorous but attainable goals for us. Every single year, these metrics increase. They're not where we want our system to be. We wish that this ended in 27-28 with 100% for every student. But we know that that's a long-term vision and not necessarily a thing that we can hold ourselves accountable to in 3 years to 100%. But we can hold ourselves accountable to small but important incremental change that affects hundreds of students for each percentage point we do change. So starting with those ends in mind, we will then give you a high-level preview to the structure or shape of our plan before a few members of exec go a little bit deeper into those content and priorities within them. Shape, little of a pun intended, but at the very, very top, you can see that our first strategy aligns to pre-K-12 academic excellence, imagining a system of academic excellence across all of our grades and all of our student schools for all of our students. Those are built around 3 of those indicators: high school graduation, 9th grade on track, and 3rd grade reading. Internally, as one of those KPIs, that grade level proficiency, that matters to us. That's what tells us a student will be able to be on track in 9th grade, that they're graduating not just with the credits they need, but the real world skills and knowledge to be successful in their lives and careers. Underneath that, student agency and wellness, that strategy really focuses on the 2 key outcomes of sense of belonging and attendance, but also another really important KPI that we heard from our staff, our students, our families consistently, which is, are we supporting students with their student behavior? It's not just one thing to feel like a sense of belonging and feel and come to school every day, but do we have our ability to support students with the greatest needs around behavior and create safe environments for their classmates, their students, and our staff? Underneath that is foundational conditions. This is probably the thing that goes understated in most plans. This is not a requirement for integrated planning. You'll see not necessarily student outcomes associated with it, but 5 core processes and conditions and systems that create the foundation for everything else to work. So when we have strong systems of professional culture, human resource and talent management, resource management, data systems, and staff and student safety systems, that's how we can build the student agency and wellness that then gets us to that academic excellence. These things sit on top of each other in the structure of this for that reason. Okay, and now the moment you've probably all been waiting for, I'm gonna pass it over to other members of exec to give you a little bit more detail in the meat and what's in each of these strategies.
Good evening, board. I'm going to walk you through some of the foundational conditions that we just outlined for you. These are kind of 5 focal areas that we've called out. Let's start with data systems. We've grown our data systems pretty significantly over the last few years, but to do what we need to do, we really need to kind of modernize and revamp the system. So we're going to be focusing on that, and then primarily to support better data dashboards and the ability for those dashboards to really inform practice out in the schools. Next to that is going to be HR and talent management. So improving our systems for hard to fill positions specifically, because that's what's providing quite a few struggles out in our schools, is just the inability to find some of the staff in those hard to fill positions. So we're going to be focusing on that, as well as just general HR systems, hiring, talent management, support, etc. Resource management, just improving resource management routines, make sure we're maximizing every resource that we have available to us to support this plan, as well as completing and really just starting and working through the process of our master facilities planning for the next 10-year cycle. And then, of course, as we saw in the data from Willamette ESD, safety is still high on everybody's mind. It's high on our mind. So just continuing to expand our layered systems of security, and then creating the conditions and the training and the support to really reduce student-caused injuries out in the schools. And then finally, all of this is kind of underpinned by a very professional culture, one that supports professional growth for all staff, and just a way to monitor and measure, gain feedback, provide input, and be active listeners to those people, both students and staff and community within our system. Thank you.
Olga, I'm going to offer one quick thing here. So I recently got some very helpful feedback about how important it is to connect our systems talk to the very real experiences of teachers in classrooms. And so I'm going to work my way down through a very short story. So I heard a story recently from teachers who were talking about how hard it is on a school when toward the end of the year, people are waiting to find out, do I get to stay here? Do I get to stay in my grade? Will my colleagues stay? And that feeling you have where you've worked so hard to build something, what you want is to keep being great at it and get better. Well, that's the story of how a teacher feels or a grade span or a faculty feels. Underneath that, though, are actually systems issues. How accurate are our enrollment projections? Underneath that is how accurate and valid is the data that we collect and where does it come from? And underneath that is, do we have the routines at the right time of year so that we're getting those enrollment projections done? We know that they're right. We get them done early enough that we get the staffing plans to schools. The staffing plans are basically right with only a few refinements, and there's less churn for those teachers in those classrooms. And so while a systems issue at the base might feel a long way from the classroom, it's actually a very short line, especially in a system of our size, where we have a lot of things going at the same time, and we have to get some of these system fundamentals right so that the teaching conditions for staff are everything that they deserve.
Thank you. Good evening, board members, student advisor, Superintendent Castañeda. I'm going to tell you about student wellness and agency. And this umbrella really covers all the resources and services that support student attendance, sense of belonging, student behaviors, and then all of the resources that we offer students that receive special education services too. So we have 5 big areas. The first one, multidisciplinary support, means that we are being very thoughtful, intentional, and efficient at combining the supports and resources that our special education department and our behavioral health department bring into schools. When a principal or a group of teachers with a parent partner is asking for help, when they are requiring the help of experts, we want to make sure that they get the help from one team that is highly qualified and highly efficient to go in, support them, and then give them a plan to follow. So we're working on our system so we can make sure that that happens every time a school asks for help. And also making sure that we are expanding and improving our behavioral intervention supports. We know that in our system, we have some students that need a little more targeted, intentional, focused support around self-regulation, self-management. And we need to do these before we ask them to engage deeply with academics. So we have to make sure that we have enough resources to attend to the needs of our students. Then social emotional learning, we need to make sure that we have a consistent and clear guidance for schools around what times in the day are we investing in helping our students process social emotional supports, and that we have the materials necessary for teachers to use with students, that we have some resources and materials that can be also sent home, or that families can access when they are struggling with something that is happening in a child's life. We want to make sure that we have all of those systems clearly identified. This goes a little bit into our next area of holistic student and family supports. We want to make sure that our families and our students know what to expect from our resources and the help that comes from schools. What are some resources that are out in the community? Who are our partners for mental health, or who are the mental health clinicians that have some availability to come and support students in our schools? We are trying to streamline and organize those resources so that they're clear for all the users in our system. The next one is really about our special education support. So we want to make sure that students are always in the least restrictive environment. And to do that, we have to have clear rules about what it looks like for a student who's in general education, and then what it looks like for every student that is in a continuum from an hour in a classroom that, because they need some special education around, supports around literacy, to a self-contained classroom that is focused on behaviors, to the Behavior Intervention Center that is a little more targeted and not in a general education setting, all the way to the Day Treatment Center. We want to make sure that every staff member in our system understands all of our services, that they are clear to our families and our students who need them, and that we have rules that we are following every single time to make sure that students can enter into those supports, and that when they're ready to exit those supports, they're welcomed back into a general education setting. And then lastly, student feedback data. We want to, I know Mr. Silva talked about these, and then Superintendent Castañeda, we need to make sure that we are using our data really well, that we understand what we're getting, and also that we have, the one thing that I wanted to add is that we have time for our staff to look at the data, interpret it, analyze it, and make decisions about it. So, so that the voices of our students that are coming through in that data are validated, and that we are making the moves that they're asking us to make.
Good evening, board directors, Superintendent Castaneda, student advisors. I am excited to talk to you about the top of that pyramid, which is academic excellence. And you'll see here that we've named this area pre-K-12 academic excellence, because one of the things that we're going to be working on intentionally over these next 2 years is charting a path where across our grade levels, we're really moving some of this work together, or moving it forward together. So elementary, middle school, high school, really being able to capitalize upon some of those foundational conditions Mr. Silva spoke on, so that we're able to leverage those data systems, leverage that information to work collectively across the system to move our academics forward. So we have 4 particular areas here that are going to help us continue our growth towards our 3 goals of 3rd grade literacy, 9th grade on track, and graduation. So the first is around an instructional framework. Our teachers, school leaders, and district leaders have done amazing work to really start to build out resources for our teams about what we believe about teaching and learning, how we organize our time, our materials, and work with our students to achieve our goals. And part of what we wanted to spend some time on is putting those things together in a place where all of our staff can find all of the resources easily, can see how they connect to other different initiatives that are happening in the district, and utilize those every single day as they're working with students. We don't want our teams to have to find some information in here, contact someone else to find the resource they need for the next unit. We really want to pull those resources together, and then also continue to curate the resources that help our teachers deliver strong instruction every day. The second area you'll see to the right of that is high quality instructional materials. We're continuing to do our curriculum adoption, making sure that our teachers have current, up-to-date materials in their hands so that they can plan and deliver excellent instruction for all of our students. We're making sure that that curriculum is high quality and viable, a viable guaranteed curriculum. So where you are in the city, what zip code you live in, won't determine which resources you get access to. We'll be able to say, whether you're in 3rd grade, you're in 9th grade, we know exactly what our bar is for rigor for what all of our students receive. That work is already underway, and we will be continuing it over the next couple of years across different content areas and grade levels. We're also looking at our assessment system. How are we ensuring that we have all of the pieces of information that truly help us understand what students know, what they're able to do, and what they're ready to learn next? One of the areas that we're leaning into over these next 2 years is ensuring that we have assessments throughout the year that help us see how students are doing on the content that has just been taught. We have assessments, we talked earlier this year when we talked about third grade literacy. We have assessments that tell us what students know and what they're ready to learn, that let us know how they're growing over the year. And we also want to know, how are they doing these last 4 to 6 weeks on the content that has been taught in literacy and mathematics? So over the next few years, we'll see a more intentional focus on ensuring that we have that data available for our teachers and for our students to understand their learning trajectories. And then finally, harking back to those foundational conditions, we're looking at professional growth. We want to have a culture and continue to grow our culture of growth and learning in the district. And that means we have to think about how do we utilize time with our teachers, with our support staff, to really understand that data. Deputy Superintendent Cobb spoke about that. How do we make sure we have time to look at the data, to reflect on it, and plan for it? And then making sure that our teachers have time to learn to use any new instructional materials, and then to develop plans that are targeted and focused on our students for future instruction. Thank you.
Very good. We're bringing this home. Last slide. One of the things that I want to say about the last 3 slides we went over is that I don't know of a district, a mid to large size district in the country that has improved and held on to improved results without each of the elements we've talked about tonight. A strong and viable curriculum across every core content area and every grade. Comprehensive assessment systems that tell you how students are doing in ways that are actionable. Data systems that tell you what to do when. And systems that work for staff. If you think back to the financial slide that we showed you at the beginning, the success for Salem-Keizer cannot come from hiring ever more people every year. We cannot afford it. What we can do is make these things work well. That is well within our reach, and it is hard work, but it is worthy work. This is what will change those 5 outcomes in the amount of time that you've given us. And this is what makes Salem-Keizer the greatest opportunity for a national success story. So next steps. So we have started sharing this with a variety of different groups. We have had the opportunity to share an early version with labor. We had a couple of hours with all of our district and building administrators. We have worked collaboratively across the district team to develop this. We have information for you. We'll be bringing it to our student cabinet, of which there are multiple people in the room on student cabinet. So you guys will see that soon too. And then you'll see here, it'll be coming back to you on 225 for a deeper look. That's when you'll see like 1 click level down from what you saw tonight. Then 311 is when we're going to be bringing it to you for review and final approval. And one of the things that matters here is that this is the date by which the integrated plan needs to be approved and sent to the state. Because it makes no sense in my mind to do these things separately as 2 separate plans. That's why we're bringing them together to you as a single aligned vision. And then finally, we submit the integrated plan to the Department of Education. We have held you for a long time without a restroom break or the opportunity to ask questions, so I will hand it back to you, Chair.
Yes, Director Pressey.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess I'll ask the question that I'm sure a lot of other board members have. So on the grade 3 reading and English, we had set, so our baseline was 26.3%. Our goal for 23-24 was 27.3. We're at 24.2, so we slid back. Do we have any sense on like what caused that? And then as a follow-up question, I guess, can we get a little bit more information on the plan? Because like now we'll have more ground to catch up, right?
Yes, I can start us with that answer, and then the team can help me if I forget something. We know that we need a very high focus on foundational skills, and we are doing a lot of work to have professional development around foundational skills and review our practices. We also didn't have an assessment system that we could rely on that was giving us good information to make some instructional moves. So something that we are implementing this year, we ran a pilot last year of a new assessment system that gives us really great information in both English and Spanish. We haven't had that before. And so last year we had a pilot for 8 elementary schools, and this year we are implementing it in every elementary school. So our teachers are not, they're not guessing because they have very accurate information, and we're learning how to use the tool. So we're expecting to see some of that too, some progress with that too. And then another thing is that as we learn and analyze the data that we're receiving, we know that the literacy assessment is not just a reading assessment. It's a reading and a writing assessment. And we needed to focus more on how our kids are engaging with that writing response, because what we see is that they do great in reading or they do okay in reading, but they just kind of give up in writing. And so we are being really intentional at having these conversations with teachers. Just a month ago, we had a session for 3rd grade teachers where we shared a unit that has a really good resource for them to teach reading and writing, and then make sure that kids are practicing that before we assess again for that state test. Okay. It's gonna take us time, and it's a combination of different strategies. And then the last thing that I don't want to forget is also good materials that we right now don't have in classrooms. We need a curriculum that is aligned to the standards. We need to have a curriculum that works for both English and Spanish instruction. And right now we don't have great materials for our teachers to use. So we need to work on that.
If I can add briefly to that, as a part of Olga's work and Danielle's work, we will be bringing forward an approach for you all that actually moves our elementary ELA new curriculum adoption forward, because we feel a sense of urgency about this. And we know that a great curriculum, well supported and carefully rolled out, is probably the single biggest building block right now to moving these 3rd grade scores. And that is a huge project for a district. There is, I would say, it might be true that there is no bigger project a district can undertake than great rollout of elementary literacy. It impacts the most teachers, it impacts the most time, and it impacts the most students. So that is, I think, one more answer to your question on instructional materials. It is also extremely expensive, and you will understand our enthusiasm and commitment to prioritizing that expense amongst the many hard decisions we'll have to make in the coming 12 months.
Dr. Sanjagiri?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all the amazing work you guys have done. And, it starts making sense after 6 years, I guess, plus with all your lean management approach of kind of aligning everything. And thank you, Superintendent, for pointing out some of the elements which you mentioned. I was just wondering, do you see the value? I mean, I also like this diligent as your system to kind of, one page I can, as a public servant, I can go to the community and talk about it. The first of the slides that you showed, Dr. McElroy, it's just got our board goals and the longitudinal data. Anyway, it's a public facing one. Could something like that be there in that diligence public facing one so that, people don't have to go back and refresh in this board meeting, but when we are talking to the community, we can show that and tell them this is it. And we can also start engaging community and family members to start pushing the car in the same direction. Because that's one piece I feel, especially some of our communities, immigrant communities, they are really wanting, some of them actually, I know, have asked me, is there any after school tutoring, etc., where we can send our kids, where we can focus on catching up reading and writing, because that's one, there is a sense of urgency. They all want their children to read and write English and math and science. And so if we know those are the goals, then we can reinforce it and they can go and start visiting and tie that to public engagement in the public comment, etc. If there is one more button you can create and that slide in a, so then when I'm talking to the media or to the radio station or to the community groups, I can say, let's go back to this page. And these are the ones, let's not talk anything else. Let's focus on this and see how we get the numbers up.
Yes, absolutely. I can definitely speak to the data parts of it, which is what you're pointing out is exactly the end result of strong data systems, that regardless of the audience, there's the data point when and where they need it relevant to them. So at a community level, being able to see our aggregate results mirrored down to what we're seeing in these conversations here, looking at those monitoring reports, mirrored down to what schools are seeing for school leadership and like long-term annual planning for them, their own schools, what a teacher sees, and fundamentally, most importantly, also what a parent sees. We have lots of opportunities in our report cards and our student assessment results to give families that information that's aligned to these outcomes and the key indicators behind it. A lot of work to go to align all those different reports across all of those different audiences, but absolutely the end result is a clear system of delivery with consistent and accurate data across all and each of those stakeholder groups.
So it can be like another button in that diligent, that page, where we can list these goals, because I just want to keep repeating the same. These are our goals. This is what we are aiming for. I want you to help me. That's the simple message I want to give.
I appreciate you raising diligent, and so I'll do a brief public service announcement on it. We have a new board public management tool, and so it's very easy to use, and our meetings from here forward will all be using Diligent. You can find it on our website. It's searchable. It cuts out a lot of the many extra steps that our community members often had to go through to find their way. We know because we were doing the exact same steps. So I just really want to thank our team for getting that up and going. Thank our board members for traveling on that journey too. I think it'll be a big improvement. And this needs a prominent space on our website so that people can see every bit of the progress we're making.
Thank you.
Wow.
Is it okay?
I am so proud to still be a part of Salem-Keizer Public Schools. There are great things happening. I was in the district over 24 years, and we served as middle school principals and high school principals, and we know that a lot of these steps are needed in order to be able to make the movements that need to be made. Oh my God, I can't tell you how happy I was to hear about the intentional focus on assessments on what is being taught. That state assessment does not get it. People can opt out. We need to know that kids are being, what we're teaching, that it is the type of curriculum that needs to be taught and that they're learning it. That's what we need to know. Oh, Lord. I'm so happy I could just drop this mic right here.
You don't go back to being a teacher again.
No.
Please. Leave us.
I did my 44 years. Yes. I'm just so proud of the work that you're doing. You all are doing outstanding work that is much needed. Rob, you keep hanging in there. You're doing a great job too. Just can't thank you all enough. I'm just so excited. I'm like, go out and celebrate. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry for bringing us back up, and I might go. I just want to ask a question that I get asked quite a bit, and it sounds like we're still getting some. I'm sorry. I know you brought us all the way up, and now I'm going to crash us back down. So, with some community people getting their background check for the district and getting denied volunteer requests for the schools, all of our schools struggling. So I've heard that with elementary on up. So I'm curious as to who would know any data around that, if we could kind of revisit that once more, because again, all hands on deck, right? Whoever's willing to help our kids do math. The reading, sitting with reading time, easy peasy. I mean, and these are well overqualified. There's no question. They've been, like I said, approved by the district. And I understand every school has, different needs and all of that stuff. But again, if we could just figure out where we're at. If, again, we're still as a district looking for volunteers, get that word out to our principals to please welcome all the help that we can afford. So, thank you.
Thank you. It is currently 7:23. This meeting is dismissed.